Alfred Cort Haddon was influenced by Spencer, Tyler, and Fraser. He was trained in anatomy and zoology initially. In 1888, he made the trip to the Torres Island between New Guinea and Australia, primarily to study coral reefs. At this time, he became fascinated by the tales of old men, and this helped him to solidify his lifelong interest in anthropology. He became the first lecturer in physical anthropology, and like Boas, he was interested in gathering all information possible before the individuals that he was collecting information from disappeared, so type of salvage ethnography. His works are many texts looking at art, headhunters, race, and the wanderings of people, the movement of individuals over time. Again, he was the key proponent for the Imperial Bureau of Ethnology, as well as the focus of museums in early British anthropology. Brownislaw Malinowski was trained in the physical sciences. He got a PhD in physics and mathematics. It was influenced by Fraser and his Golden Bough. He is known for his association with the London School of Economics, both before and as a student and then later on. He studied under Siegelman, and during World War I, he was traveling to British-controlled South Pacific. He was found to be an enemy national, and the British essentially did not permit him to return to Europe. Well, he could have returned, but he would have been essentially an enemy national and treated as such. But they offered him to stay on the Trobriand Islands, which he did do, becoming engaging long-term participant observation amongst the Trobrianders. He went to London School of Economics after the war. Malinowski's approach, he dismisses Boas's idea to study history in order to understand the current state of culture, noting that reconstructing history is what he refers to as an unpardonable sin. He dismissed popular diffusionists such as W.H. Rivers and Grafton Elliott Smith, who were trying to prove that all cultures began in ancient Egypt and diffused from there. Malinowski's branch of functionalism is psychological functionalism, and here the emphasis is on people and their basic needs. So for Malinowski, cultural institutions function to meet the basic physical and psychological needs of people in society. The method, his methods, like Boas, was based on extensive, in-depth fieldwork that supported his theoretical position. He followed the 7 basic needs and how individuals and society was essentially structured in order to meet these needs of individuals. These included nutrition, reproduction, bodily comforts, safety, relaxation, movement, and growth. He argued that basic needs were converted to cultural behavior through the use of symbols. One of his best-known works is Argonauts of the Western Pacific. He wrote this as a reaction to the view of primitive human beings as inferior to other supposedly modern human beings. And he used the Kula as a counterexample. He believed that technologically primitive peoples were fully rational and just as intelligent as civilized people. He critiques the concept of economic man, that humans rationally deploy limited resources to competing ends in such a way as to increase their personal benefits. In the Kula, so Malinowski examines the Kula and examines the Kula exchange in Argonauts. And he notes that there's a psychological function of the Kula, that individuals were able to achieve prestige through their participation in Kula. Trobriand Islanders were aware of their individual actions as well as the motives behind those actions. So they were in fact acting in a rational manner. Malinowski noted that a person cannot objectively analyze the system in which he or she participates. And this became, he's borrowing this as well from psychoanalytic technique. In anthropology, this is the contrast between the emic and the eidetic view. And then, the idea of one yielding a supposedly objective view from the outside, of being able to see what you can't see when you're the fish in the water, so to speak. Culture existed, according to Malinowski, to serve human needs, and that ultimately those needs were individual, physiological, and psychological requirements. the conflict exists within society but does not drive the system. Rather, conflict is an aberration in what generally is the smooth functioning of the organism. So going back to Spencer's organic analogy of the functionalist as a whole. So you have the movement of goods and the Kula exchange, the movement of arm shells in a counterclockwise motion, and the movement of necklaces in a clockwise motion. And the two then continue to pass one another, and there's a very particular protocol that one establishes with one's trading partners over time, and Malinowski expounds on this in Argonauts and in the reading in McGee and Worms for this week, the excerpt there. His work was extensively illustrated. Of course, the text is rather deficient in these types of illustrations. Here's a more detailed account or rendering of the Kula exchange with some of the names of the particular locations. The critics of Malinowski insisted that the Kula, Malinowski insisted that the Kula was a rational system directed towards non-rational ends, that is, the exchange of items with only symbolic value. He gives little weight to the fact that the offerings given to induce a partner to part with valuable goods, the vayuga, are utilitarian items such as pigs, bananas, yams, and axe blades. So this gimwali, this other exchange of these economically important for purposes of subsistence. And so he does not analyze to see if participants gain an economic benefit in the context of these exchange. In essence, he ignores the data that would disprove his theory. In Magic, Science, and Religion, 1925, as well as Coral Gardens and Their Magic in 1935, he argues against Fraser that people in primitive societies had magic beliefs and other superstitions because they had some form of primitive mentality and were incapable of scientific thought. Rather, Malinowski presented people in so-called primitive societies or simple societies as rational, that they used magic in order to control circumstances that would otherwise be beyond their control. So try to get some sort of control over a given situation to psychologically prepare oneself for danger. So to reassure individuals in unpredictable situations. Malinowski's students are broad, so his influence in British anthropology is rather broad as well. We'll be talking about a few of these individuals later. Radcliffe-Brown studied anthropology at Cambridge under Cort, Haddon, and Pitt Rivers. He did field work in the Andaman Islands as well as in Australia. He was interested in deriving social laws from behavior, and he looked at the comparative study of different cultures rather than intensive field work in one culture. In World War I, he was the director of education on Tonga, the British colony, and an earlier field work on the Andaman Islands and the Sea of Bengal between India and Malaysia. He drew heavily on the work of Emil Durkheim, and he sought to understand cultural institutions and how they maintain the equilibrium and cohesion of society. His project was one that was interested in the search for social laws that could be derived again from this comparison of cultures. In the piece in the text on joking relationships from 1940, he notes that hostility can be expressed in a non-threatening manner through ritualized disrespect between kinsmen without threatening the social structure. He rejected the culture concept later in his career as an abstract concept, that is, the values and norms of society cannot be observed. Hence, the science of culture was impossible. He preferred to limit his research to social structures, the principles that organize persons in a society, such as kinship. And again, we might think about how both Durkheim and Miles frame this in the context of organic versus mechanical solidarity, although certainly we see with Radcliffe-Brown extending this argument about joking relationships and kinship systems as a unit of analysis throughout different societies, particularly in the tension that exists in intermarriage or marriage between different families, as well as the relationship of individuals from generation to generation. The applied functionalists were involved as colonial administrators who permitted and sometimes financed fieldwork. Radcliffe-Brown had been a colonial administrator himself, and many of the functionalists saw services to the colonial administrators of their research areas as one of the main aims of their work. So this was what anthropology was being produced for, essentially. The functionalists did not challenge the basic fact of colonization as a whole or the subservient position of the colonized. The critics brought in issues about gender. In other words, how does women behave towards her mother's brother? This is not answered or even mentioned within the text on joking relationships. Also, the ahistorical idea, ahistoricity of colonialism as a whole. What were the changes that were brought about by the colonial encounter? And not only the colonial encounter in the context of the macro scale in terms of one country to another, but one individual, an anthropologist coming in from a colonial country, and then how does that impact the people that that anthropologist is working with. Nevertheless, functionalism has been picked up within anthropology in terms of social network analysis. Major goal of social anthropology was to identify social structures and formal relationships between them. And that qualitative or discrete mathematics would be a necessary tool to do this. And we see this with things like, again, social network analysis, where you measure how close or central individuals are, for example, in social groups. Evans Pritchard's work, he's noted for his work with the London School of Economics, influenced by both Malinowski and Siegelman, who was the founder of ethnography of Sudan. He did field work amongst the Azande in 1926, producing in 1937 Witchcraft, Oracles, and Magic amongst the Azande. He did works amongst the Noor. He was at the University of Cairo, and he developed a program of structural functionalism. He built off of Radcliffe-Brown's work there. He was knighted in 1971 after a full career as an academic. In Witchcraft, Oracles, and Magic amongst the Azande, Pritchard describes how witchcraft may explain unfortunate events and how oracles and magic are used to control other people's actions. A general definition of witchcraft is the performance of evil by human beings believed to be in possession of some innate non-human power to do evil, whether or not as an intentional or self-aware. The Azande version of witchcraft is mangu, a substance that is in the body of witches. It's primarily located in the sternum. It grows over time. It's very specific in terms of gender. Male impacts male and female impacts male. And it's thought to work when the soul of an organ was extracted, causing suffering and diseases. And again, these witches themselves might not even be cognizant that they are in fact witches. So there's a whole apparatus to essentially inform the witches of their transgressions and to bring them back into line within the smooth functioning of society. To the Azande, witchcraft was a natural explanation for events, including death. However, some misfortunes were due to people breaking a taboo or other moral rules, or being responsible for their own problems. So, for example, in the book on the Azande, there's a number of details. One of these is about a collapsing granary. People often rested under granaries, which rested on logs. Termites are rather prevalent in this region. They eat the logs, and eventually granaries collapse. But granaries collapse at a particular time, and that particular time is not an accident. This idea that there are no coincidences. So if someone is killed by a collapsing granary, there has to be some explanation aside from the mere fact of termites being there and eating it. So why was it that particular time when it collapsed? And witchcraft can be one possible explanation, but not the only explanation. Pritchard saw witchcraft accusation as a way to maintain social cohesion and correct certain behavior. So reading this is strictly a functionalist approach within the context of society as a whole. Mary Douglas, on the other hand, examining witchcraft later, noted that there are two types of witchcraft, both present different social functions. Witchcraft, in terms of outsider, can strengthen group ties, or if everyone in fact recognizes that someone is a witch, then that individual is very clearly defined as a witch. The group of people can rally around this idea and impose social sanctions upon the witch. However, in some circumstances where the witch is internal, this can weaken group ties, potentially causing the social order to be rearranged. If the witch is a dangerous deviant, then the accusation could be a way of defending the values of the community as a whole. Nevertheless, some individuals might rally around the accused witch, leading to rifts within society as a whole. He is also known, Pritchard is also known for his work with Fortes in African political systems, and this was his work amongst the Noor. They were, for these individuals, representatives of a cultural type rather than a unique manifestation themselves. He discusses Noor ecology and that the environment is an important factor, but again, emphasis on social organization rather than environmental determinism. The influence here has been felt in both postmodernism for the notion of overlapping and situational identity, as well as cultural ecology, which is concerned with the relationship between ecology and social organization. And we'll be talking about both of these later on in this theory class. Meyer Fortes was trained in psychology. He studied at the London School of Economics with Firth and Malinowski. He has a number of works. He's probably best known for African political systems. He influenced the Manchester School of Social Anthropology, which emphasized the problems of working in colonial Central Africa, so somewhat more reflexive and not necessarily buying the whole colonial project. And this is most noted in the work of Max Gluckman.